Hey up everybody, welcome back to the Ardu Cycling YouTube channel, where today I am going to be talking about the VELOGAMES Paris-Roubaix. Of course, we've just had a really good women's edition won by Elisa Longo Borghini, so hopefully the men's race can be equally as impressive. Of course, we do have some questions going into this, the main one being Wout van Aert coming back from COVID. He was announced to ride this race on Thursday, so how is he actually feeling for this race? I'm not too sure. For me, if he was kind of deciding whether to do this race on Thursday, that seems a little bit late. I think that perhaps the safer option might be to go with Van der Poel. For 32, Wout van Aert seems like a bit of a gamble to be going with, just because you don't know fully how he's going. I think that Van der Poel for 30 is a much safer option and gives you a little bit more leeway to put 2 points into another rider. I think that Van der Poel is probably the rider who I'd recommend you most put on your team. Asgreen for 26, I think is really good. He looked very good at Amstel. And he even beat Michael Matthews in the sprint for 6th place, which is really important when you consider that in the small groups that come to the line, there's generally the sprint where you need to do at the end. So I think that that's important for the minor placings, is that some of your riders are good at sprinting. Lampaert is targeting this race. He has been for a very long time. And I think that his consistency in this race is really good. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he came out and did a really good performance. But again, a bit risky for 24. Perhaps Mads Pedersen for 24 as well might be a better shout. Of course, he looked good at that kind of Saif race in France recently. So with his fast sprint, it means that if he's in a reduced kind of group at the end, he will more than likely pick up first place in that group. That might be for the victory, might not be. Stuyven for 24, a bit risky again, kind of like Lampaert, just because you don't know how his form's going, but he does like to target this race, so I wouldn't count Stuyven out completely. But I do think that perhaps Pedersen would be the best 24 pointer that you could go with, or at least the safest one. I don't think that Greg's a very good pick. Senechal, very similar to Lampaert. Quick-Step really need to do good in this Roubaix to kind of salvage their Classics campaign, which hasn't really been up to scratch to their standards. And I do think that Senechal, he really likes this race. Of course, he lives very near to the course, and I do think that he will try and put in a good performance in this race, if not for himself, and definitely for Asgreen. The best 20 pointers, you got Ackermann, Ballerini, who I don't really like too much, but you got Ganna, who a lot of people are hyping up for this race, but I'm not overly convinced that a guy who's going to be debuting this race. I know he did well in the junior version of this race, but it's very kind of rare that a debutant does well, unless it was an exceptional circumstance like last year where the weather made a pretty big impact on it. You've then got Kristoff, who again, people are hyping up because of his Scheldeplatz performance. You have to remember that was cold and wet as well. This is going to be quite a bone dry, fairly warm day, so I'm not overly sure about Kristoff. I think that he's better at Flanders than he is at Roubaix, but I do think that he could definitely finish in the top 10 in this race just because of his form at the moment. Christophe Laporte, just because Wout van Aert is here and other riders might be looking at Wout, Laporte could have a bit more freedom and could get up the road a bit easier in comparison to if Wout van Aert wasn't there. So I do think that Laporte for 20 is a very good pick as well. You got Mohoric, who I'm not overly certain about. I think that he does go okay over the cobbles, and I think that he is the leader for Bahrain Victorious, but I do think that somebody like Laporte or Kristoff would be a better choice, but I'm not writing Mohoric out completely. In terms of the 18 pointers, I think the best one is Dylan van Baarle, just because of how he's looked pretty recently. He's been he was up there in Amstel in that kind of leading group. Then he was also, second place at Flanders. He also did pretty good at the World Champs last year where he came second. So he's good over these long distance cobbled races. So I think that Van Baarle is a pretty safe one for 18. 16 point riders, Stefan Kung I think is a really good one. If I was to price him right now, it would probably be somewhere around 20. I think that this race really suits him with his time trialling abilities, kind of fewer climbs. I think the raw power that he has to his benefit. Other than that, you could maybe pick Florian Vermeersch, the runner-up from last year's race. I do think that he'll finish inside the top 10, top 15, but I'm not certain about him finishing on the podium again. I think that Kung is probably the best 16 pointer that you could go with. 14 point riders, I do like Mike Teunissen for the same reason why I like Laporte. Everybody looks at Wout van Aert, and that could allow a Jumbo-Visma rider to get up the road. Teunissen has won the junior version of this race, and he's also done pretty well in some of the more recent editions, so I don't see a reason why Mike Teunissen wouldn't do well in this race. 12 point riders, for me I'd probably go with Rasmus Tiller or Connor Swift, just because I do think they have the highest probability of finishing inside like the top 15 or something like that. I do think that all the other ones are perhaps on a domestique duty. Maybe Luke Durbridge, if you're throwing a real Hail Mary at it, you could pick him as well. Best 10-point rider I do think is Fred Wright, because of his performance at the Tour of Flanders. That shows that he is capable of doing these long monument races over cobbles, and I don't see a reason why he couldn't finish in the top 10 in this race like he did in the Tour of Flanders. Other than that, you're looking maybe at riders to get inside the breakaway. Again, somebody like Timo Ruzen, Luke Rowe, something like that might be a good one for you to choose. The best 8-point riders, you've got Guillaume Boivin, who finished inside the top 10 of this race last year, which is a very good performance from him. I'm not sure how his form is looking at the moment, but I do think that he will be the leader for Israel Premier Tech, so I think that he would be a safe option to go with. I do also like Olivier Legac. He's been around the kind of 30th place in a lot of these cobbled races, so something like E3 and Gent-Wevelgem, and also Amstel Gold Race. He was up there kind of around 30th place. I do think that FDJ will try and get riders into the breakaway, and I do think that Legac could be a rider like that for Stefan Kung to go and bridge up to. Other than that, you could maybe go with Yannick Steimler or Nathan van Hooijdonk, who could also be foils for their respective teams to go up the road. Maybe Brent Van Moor could do what Florian Vermeersch did last year. That could be another possibility. Lewis Askey I like for the same reason that I like Olivier Legac. He might try and get into the breakaway. Other than that, you do have Stefan Bissiger, who was in the break last year, and his kind of characteristics suit this race very well. That time trialling ability will come in very handy for him. You got Delier, who's finished second at this race before, of course. You got Alexis Goujard, who's been in the break in this race before, and of course we've seen that being in the break is usually quite a good way of trying to get kind of a high positioning in this race. Dan Hull could try and get the breakaway as well for Trek Segafredo. They could play that card. His time trialling ability, he's a tall frame. This is a kind of race that really suits him. But for me, I do think that the best 6-pointer, in my opinion, is Mathis Louvel. I think he finished 14th at Omloop. I think he also finished inside the top 20 at Dwars Vlaanderen and the Ronde van Vlaanderen, so he can do the distance. He's only like 22-23 for Frenchman, but I do really like him as a 6-pointer. He also came pretty good in the Paris Cadembert pretty recently as well. Other than that, you're looking at Jonas Rutsch, who finished in 11th place of this race last year. He hasn't looked too good recently, but that's no reason why he might just pull out a good performance here. You've got Taco van der Hoorn, who usually gets in breakaways, maybe Mick van Dijk as well. He could be a really good one. Dries van Gestel, 3rd place finisher at Gent-Wevelgem. And then you've also got maybe like Bram Wellington, who might get in for breakaway as well. The best 4-pointers, really, we may as well just go straight to them. Magnus Sheffield, Ben Turner, both of them on fire at the moment. If I had to choose one of them, I'd probably choose Ben Turner, just because he's done more cobbled races, so he's used to kind of the distance. He did Flanders, so he's used to that kind of length of race, so I think that he would stand a better chance of lasting further into a race than Magnus Sheffield would. If you really needed a third 4-point rider, I'd probably go Julian Vermote for the assist points on Mathieu van der Poel. In terms of teams that I'm thinking of going with, there's really 2 that I'm between, and it's this team on your screen, and then it's also this next one, which is this one. So the first one was kind of Dylan van Baarle and Stefan Kung. The second one is Mads Pedersen and Fred Wright. I think that this is difficult to choose between, because Fred Wright could definitely do well in this race. So this team is kind of a bit more risk in that I'm banking on Fred Wright doing well. But I think that Dylan van Baarle and Stefan Kung is the safer option, but perhaps, they might finish lower down. They might both finish somewhere between 10th and 15th, rather than kind of risking it all for somebody to try and get inside the top 5, or maybe even the win with Mads Pedersen. But let me know what you think in the comments down below. What teams are you thinking of going with? Who do you think is going to win? And of course, all that is left to say is to keep safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video. Salut!